Welcome to Shuffle Source. I'm your host Brandon, and today we are back with another Commander Precon upgrade video. This time we will be upgrading the Living Energy Precon from Aetherdrift. Let's get into it. Real quick, before discussing the commander we will be using, let's quickly go over the Precon upgrade format that we have here at Shuffle Source. The first item to note is that we will either use the primary or secondary commander when making these videos. Next, we try to keep a cap of around $100 or less when upgrading these Precon decks. We will do that by adding 10 cards and removing 10 cards. Additionally, we will have a few what we call no budget options near the end of the video, and those are for people that either already have the cards or maybe have a little bit extra budget to make this deck go further. And lastly, we do use TCG player pricing at the time of recording, which will be displayed at the bottom of the page while discussing the additions and no budget options. So the commander we will be upgrading today is Saheeli, Radiant Creator, who is also the face commander of the deck. Saheeli is 1 colorless, 1 green, 1 blue, 1 red, a 4/4 legendary human artificer that has, when you cast an artificer or artifact spell, you gain an energy. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 3 energy. When you do, create a token that's a copy of target permanent you control, except it's a 5/5 artifact creature in addition to its other types and has haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So you can tell by our commander that we definitely want to gain and use energy here, and the deck helps with that by having a lot of artifacts and a lot of artificers to help you get the energy going. As far as Saheeli's secondary ability, we definitely want to choose targets with her ability that are going to either give us great enter the battlefield effects or great die effects, or in the best case scenario, both. And that's because we do have to end up sacrificing the token at the end of the next end step. So the way we want to maximize this deck and really make the most out of Saheeli's abilities here is to add additional energy generation, provide really good energy payoffs, and to add great targets to copy with our commander. There's also a bit of a Thopter sub-theme here, so we do have the ability to create quite a bit of 1/1 flying Thopters here to either swing in for some cheap evasive damage or set up our board with a few cheap blockers. However, there's also an upgrade that we're going to be adding in here where having those extra Thopters around we can actually use for additional value. And here we have the first of our additions here coming in at 20 cents. We have Aether Revolt. For 2 colorless and 2 red, we have an enchantment that reads Revolt. As long as a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. And then it also has, whenever you get 1 or more energy, Aether Revolt deals that much damage to any target. So this deck has a lot of ways to gain energy. We're also going to be adding some additional ways to gain that energy. And this card will just allow you to deal damage directly to your opponent's face or some of their key creatures on the battlefield. This triggers with each instance of energy gain, and you're going to end up with a lot of ways to gain energy on a given turn. Additionally, while it will not always happen, there are a few ways that we can benefit from the increased damage clause here that the card provides. And you can do that by killing off your Thopters, for example. We have a card that we will be adding that will actually help you kill those Thopters off for value. But also, even if you did something like send off your Thopters to an opponent, they now have a decision to make. Do they just take all the damage from the Thopter smacking them? Or do they risk blocking one and then setting up your second main phase to trigger all of your energy generation, and then they just get smacked directly in the face for a lot more damage than if they would have just not blocked the Thopter? It's just a really good card, and if you can really get your energy ball rolling here, you can just do so much damage directly to wherever you need it to go. Next up, we have Balor. For 3 colorless and 2 red, we have a 5/5 creature demon that has flying. When Balor attacks or dies, choose 1 or more. Each mode must target a different player. Target opponent draws 3 cards, then discards 3 cards at random. Target opponent sacrifices a non-token artifact, and Balor deals damage to target opponent equal to the number of cards in their hand. So this is exactly the type of card that we want to copy with our commander. It has both an attacks and dice trigger. Use your commander to copy this. When it attacks, you get to choose each effect once for each of your opponents, and then when it dies, because you have to sacrifice it at the next end step due to Saheeli's ability, you get to do it again. So you're getting 6 effects here potentially for 3 energy, and the copy's on a 5/5 evasive body? That's really good. Not to mention, if you have one opponent that has a lot of cards in their hand, you can do some serious damage to them with that third ability if your opponent doesn't have an answer. Balor is just a lot of fun in this deck, and you'll be glad you added it. Our next addition for 24 cents is Behemoth of Vault 0. For 6 colorless, we have a 6/6 artifact creature robot with trample. When Behemoth of Vault 0 enters the battlefield, you get 4 energy. When Behemoth of Vault 0 dies, you may pay an amount of energy equal to target non-land permanent's mana value. When you do, destroy that permanent. So this is a fun card to include because if you choose this card with your commander, you will actually go energy positive here because it will cost you 3 energy to use your commander's ability to copy it. And then when the copy enters the battlefield, you're actually going to get 4 energy from this. Also, if you have the extra energy, which this deck absolutely makes a lot of, it's a nice piece of removal that will come in from the copy, which will have haste and trample on that 5/5 body it creates. And if your opponents do not answer it and you still have the energy next turn, you can do the same thing again and remove another piece off your opponent's board. It's just a great include here. Next up, coming in at $3.16 is Electro Siphon. For 2 blue and 1 red, we have an instant that says counter target spell, you get an amount of energy equal to its mana value. So here we have a very thematic energy-based counterspell. It also doesn't have any constraints on the type of spell it can counter, which is also very nice. And it can net us a decent amount of energy depending on the spell you decide to counter. I will also tell you that the look on your opponent's face is absolutely priceless when you counter one of their very high mana cost value spells. And not only is it countered, but then you gain a bunch of energy based off of that spell's cost. It's a really fun spell. It's a really good include. You won't regret having it in your deck. The next addition we have here for $1.40 is Ethereum Sculptor. For 1 colorless, 1 blue, we have a 1/2 artifact creature, Vidalcan Artificer. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So we like this card for a few reasons. One is it's a cheap body, you can get on the board really quickly. Secondly, it is an artificer, so it will trigger your commander to get you energy from casting it. Not to mention there are a ton of artifacts in this deck, so being able to reduce the cost of your artifacts over the course of the game, or as long as your opponents will let you have this creature on the battlefield, will easily pay for itself, and you should absolutely add this card. The next edition we have coming in at 89 cents is Gonti's Aether Heart. For 6 colorless, we have a legendary artifact that says, when Gonti's Aether Heart or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you get 2 energy. Pay 8 energy, exile Gonti's Aether Heart, take an extra turn after this one. So we're adding this card in because it's yet another source of energy generation. There are a lot of artifacts in the deck like we mentioned. Also, you can generate Thopters, which are artifacts, which are going to trigger this card even further. So this just really helps with the energy generation here. It's an artifact itself, so it will also give you energy based off your commander being in play when you cast it. And really being able to take that extra turn when you need it with that stockpile of energy you have could really gain you the advantage and win you the game. Our next card here, coming in at 6 cents, is It Genitorium. For 1 blue, 1 red, we have an artifact that reads, if you would get 1 or more energy, you get that many plus 1 energy instead. Then you can tap this, draw a card, activate only if you've paid or lost 4 or more energy this turn. So again, it's another energy accelerator here. It comes down early. Every instance of energy you gain is going to get you another. So if you also have your commander in play with this out, she is now gaining 2 energy every time you cast an artifact or an artificer. And then it also rewards you by when you spend your energy, you can then get a bit of card draw on this, which we all know card draw is great. Our next edition, coming in also at 6 cents, is Royal Cartographer. For 1 colorless, 1 blue, we have a 1/3 creature Murloc Rogue with landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get an energy. Then you can tap this creature, pay 6 energy, draw 3 cards. So we like this card because it is a cheap blocker. It comes down early. It's yet again another energy generator and is another source of card draw when you really need it. And being able to use that outlet to draw 3 cards is great. Yet another way to add additional card draw in this deck, which the deck actually needed, so this card does help out. Our next edition, we have Skull Clamp. For 1 colorless, it is an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/-1. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards, and it has an equipped cost of 1. Skull Clamp is an excellent and classic draw engine, especially in this deck. I've already mentioned before, we do have a bit of a Thopter sub-theme here. So you can pay 1 to purposely put this card on your 1/1 Thopters, which will kill it immediately and trigger the drawing 2 cards, which is excellent card advantage for you, and is probably the best use of those Thopters. Additionally, with Saheeli's ability, you do have to sacrifice the token at the next end step. So you might as well put Skull Clamp on that token if you don't already have another target, and then you're going to end up drawing 2 cards when that creature dies. So Skull Clamp can really go a long way here. It's a great addition to this deck. And here we have our final upgrades. We have Wurmcoil Engine for 6 colorless. We have a 6/6 artifact creature worm that has Death Touch and Lifelink. When Wurmcoil Engine dies, create a 3/3 colorless worm artifact creature token with Death Touch and a 3/3 colorless worm artifact creature token with Lifelink. So again, this is one of those ideal cards to add to a deck like this. It's an amazing target for our commander's ability. You create the token, you swing in, gain the life, probably kill something with it if it blocks, and then because you have to sacrifice the token that you make with your commander at the next end step, you still get the 2 tokens that it creates off dying, and those get to stay on the board. And then next turn, if your original Wurmcoil Engine is still on the battlefield, you just copy it again with your commander and repeat. And then soon you have a board filled with worms that have Death Touch and Lifelink. It also adds a little bit of life gain to the deck, which is always nice. I love this card in this deck. And here we have the first of our removals. We have Aethertide Whale for 4 colorless and 2 blue. We have a 6/4 creature whale with flying. When this creature enters, you get 6 energy, and you can pay 4 energy. Return this creature to its owner's hand. First thing here is it is a bit of an expensive creature to bring into the battlefield, and at the end of the day, you're really just getting a 6/4 flying body. Yes, it does give you some energy when it enters, but you're almost never going to use that second ability because there are so many better ways for you to use the energy in this deck. Honestly, this is the card I cut to add Wurmcoil Engine, which is the same mana cost, and I have something that synergizes better with my commander in the fact that it is an artifact and has a great dice trigger for additional value. The next of our removals, we have Aetherwind Basker for 4 colorless and 3 green. We have a 7/7 creature lizard with trample. Whenever this creature enters or attacks, you get energy for each creature you control. Then you can pay energy. This creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So one of the reasons, again, we want to cut this card is it does help bring down the curve a little bit. We already do have some very costly cards in this deck. The energy gain is also very variable depending on the board state that you have. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad card, I just feel that your mileage is really going to vary too much for this card to feel worth it. Our next removal is Bootlegger Stash for 5 colorless and 1 green. It is an artifact that says lands you control have tap, create a treasure token. There's a lot of things going against this card for this particular deck, first of which it's an expensive mana cost. It's also slow in that we need to use our lands to tap to create the treasure instead of tapping our lands for mana. So you're essentially, after you cast this, waiting another turn before you can even use it to create treasure. And while our deck does care about artifacts on the board and having artifacts, our commander would prefer that we cast them so that we actually get the energy from her first ability. So this card really doesn't help us with that. Our next removal is Conjurer's Closet. For 5 colorless, we have an artifact that reads, at the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. This is an expensive artifact for the value that this card will bring to this particular type of deck. This card is much better served in a deck that would be what we would normally call a blink deck, meaning we're purposely and actively trying to have cards that we bring in and out of the battlefield because we're very enters the battlefield focused. However, what I've found is that if you do end up playing this card in this deck, what you end up finding is that you may be able to get some value from it, but it's not really ever going to feel worth the 5 mana cost that it is to bring it out. Our next removal here is Disallow. For 1 colorless and 2 blue, we have an instant that says counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. I don't necessarily think this is a bad card. I think it's a fine card to include in a precon. However, we're going to actually be swapping this out 1-to-1 with Electro Siphon, which instead will counter any type of spell and give us energy based off of the mana value of the spell that we're countering. Here we have our next removal, Duplicant. For 6 colorless, we have a 2/4 artifact creature shapeshifter that has Imprint. When this creature enters, you may exile target non-token creature. As long as a card exiled with this creature is a creature card, this creature has the power, toughness, and creature types of the last creature card exiled with it. It's still a shapeshifter. Honestly, this is one of the first cards I cut. 6 mana is a very expensive piece of removal, and if you do end up copying the creature, notice it doesn't give you the abilities of the creature that you exiled. And that is honestly enough for me to not even have a second look at this. The next card on the chopping block is One with the Machine. For 3 colorless and 1 blue, we have a sorcery that reads, draw cards equal to the highest mana value among artifacts you control. So we have other sources of card draw in this deck, including some that we're adding. and at the cost of 4 mana, I just don't want our card draw to be contingent on what our board state has. Even when I'm building a deck from scratch that is artifact heavy, One with a Machine usually doesn't end up making the cut anyway, because there are just so many other better pieces and more reliable pieces of card draw, in my opinion, in that color. Our next removal is Peema Aetherseer. For 3 colorless and 1 green, we have a 3/2 creature elf druid that says when Peema Aetherseer enters the battlefield, you get an amount of energy equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. You can also pay 3 energy, target creature blocks this turn if able. So first thing is, I feel that this card is a bit expensive for what it does. It's very, again, situational to your board state. While you do have some decent sized creature, the deck isn't really filled with high power creatures. There are a few, but it's not its main strategy here. I would personally rather put in a card that has less variability. I also don't think you're going to find many scenarios in which you're going to use the second ability over what you can use your energy for in other places in this deck. And honestly, at the same mana cost, if I have the ability to play my commander instead, I'm going to play my commander on turn 4 and not this card anyway. The next card getting the cut is Retrofitter Foundry. For 1 colorless, we have an artifact that says pay 3 colorless, untap this artifact, pay 2 colorless, tap it, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token, pay 1 colorless, tap it, sacrifice a servo, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying, or tap this, sacrifice a Thopter, create a 4/4 colorless construct artifact creature token. While this is a cheap artifact and it can come down early, it's just very expensive to really get your value out of the card at all. You would honestly much rather be doing anything else with your mana instead of sinking it into this artifact. The only time that I think this would truly be beneficial is if you literally had no other plays with your mana on your turn. And the last of our removals, we have Soul Guide Lantern. For 1 colorless, it is an artifact that says when this artifact enters, exile target card from a graveyard. Or you can tap it, sacrifice this artifact, exile each opponent's graveyard, or you can pay 1, tap it, sacrifice this artifact to draw a card. While this card does provide some graveyard hate to this deck, I'd rather focus on advancing our strategy instead of potentially stopping theirs with this particular card. Also, only having 1 instance of card draw because you have to sacrifice it is not that great. I personally ended up choosing to cut this for Izzet Genitorium, which is going to help us with our energy generation and has the ability for repeated card draw. We've now made it to the no budget options part of our video here, and the first no budget option we have is Parallel Lives. For 3 colorless and 1 green, we have an enchantment that reads, if an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. Do you know what's better than creating 1 token with our commander? Creating an additional token with our commander. So now you're going to get 2 tokens for 3 energy, which is a fantastic rate. In addition, there are other ways we generate tokens in this deck. For example, I mentioned we have a Thopter sub-theme. Also, not to mention our boy Triplicate Titan. When he dies, instead of making 3, how about we make 6 tokens? Or Worm Coil Engine, instead of making 2 tokens, we make 4. This card will just go a long way in this deck, and it's just super powerful. The next of our no budget options we have here is Simulacrum Synthesizer. For 2 colorless and 1 blue, we have an artifact that reads, when Simulacrum Synthesizer enters the battlefield, scry 2. When another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with, this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. The reason this card is great to include is, as you know, there are plenty of artifacts in this deck that will trigger this to create what we call constructs, which are the artifact creatures which essentially have the power and toughness equal to the amount of artifacts you control. Plus, we have a lot of artifacts in this deck and a way to make a lot of Thopters, and those Thopters are artifacts. So these construct artifact creatures can actually get very big very quickly. This is also a very fun copying target for your commander. When you copy it, the first Simulacrum Synthesizer will see the second one and will then immediately create that construct artifact creature. Then if you play any of your 3+ artifacts in the deck, you're now going to create 2 of those artifact creatures. This card has the ability for you to generate a board that will run over your opponents very quickly. And the last of our no budget options, we have Sundial of the Infinite. For 2 colorless, we have an artifact that says pay 1 colorless and tap. End the turn. Activate this ability only during your turn. Exile all spells and abilities on the stack. Discard down to your maximum hand size. Damage wears off. And this turn and until end of turn effects end. So this is a nice cheap artifact to go ahead and get on the board early. If your commander's in play when you play it, you're going to obviously gain energy from it coming out. But the real reason this card is in this deck is it's going to allow you to keep the tokens that your commander generates. Because there is the sacrifice at the next end step clause on the tokens, Sundial the Infinite will end the turn before the end step, and your tokens will not have to be sacrificed. Being able to keep the tokens of the permanents you copy with your commander is massive. The best part is you can choose to use this whenever you want. Maybe some of the tokens you're copying you want to die because the die triggers are fantastic. But if you want to keep some of your other powerful permanents on the board, this is a great way to get them to stick around. And there you have it. After upgrading this deck, we have a final upgrade cost of $23.38. This total does not include the no budget options that we just went over. Thankfully, over the past year or so, there have been a lot of energy card support, so the energy cards have become very affordable. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe as it really helps us out. Also, let me know in the comments below what you think about the Living Energy Precon. Which cards are you the most excited to try, and which would you consider adding to your deck? And with that, until next time, thank you for watching.